That's the next one.
All right. So now that I've finished my cupcake, it is 4:32, and we will call the meeting to order. So just so everybody knows what the cupcakes are for, one of our newest members up here, Miss McNulty, who happens to also be a good friend of mine, is celebrating a birthday. And I told her it's up to her to share the birthday.
I have entered a new decade.
Milestone birthday. It's worth celebrating, we'll say that. So please enjoy the cupcakes. All right, so first up, roll call. Ms. Buck, here. Mr. Post for Mr. Manhove. Ms. McNulty? Here. Ms. Petco? Here. Mr. Hanson? Here. Mr.
Here,
Anderson?
Young,
Say your name.
Amundsen.
It is Anderson. I say it, and then other people confuse me sometimes.
If you're Norway, it's a Munson. I'm not Norway.
Mr. Manhove, your tag.
Present.
Your tag's throwing me off.
Arrogant.
I'm going WMATA today.
And Mr. Rudolph is here for Ms. Acton.
Temporarily she'll be here later.
Okay.
Nope.
Here, look at this. You won't even know.
I figured anytime named that, I needed to go visit, so.
I know. Who would be the,
Exactly.
who would be what? Oh, yeah. Got it. We had that discussion last month.
I can hold an anything out here.
It's okay.
Particular reason for that.
No, I just was
A few other places that were qualified. You didn't
thinking
care.
about odd and even numbers because of the assembly meeting thing, so. All right, Craig, would you make our public involvement announcements?
All AMAS meetings are open to the public. If we have business items, a presentation by staff or a consultant, and then the committee will be given a chance to discuss it, and after that, the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you. All right, first item before us is approval of the agenda. Moved by Mr. Lindsay, seconded by Mr. Lincoln. Are there any opposed? Any objections to the agenda? All right, the agenda is approved. All right, we do have a set of meeting minutes in front of us from last month, the June 14th.
Move to approve.
A second.
Seconded by Ms. McNulty. Any objections or discussions? Hearing none, those are approved. Moving right along. First item before us, our action item is the 2019 and 2022 draft TIP public release.
So I did not give myself a memo, but that's okay. Oh, no, there it is. Basically, this is, what we've given you is the draft tip, which you recognize this format. And behind that, the ranking and scoring of the roadway and the non-motorized projects. So this is just an aggregate score of all the people who ranked and scored, and that's there. And what staff did after we had the ranking, go down the list and start filling in the puzzle here. You'll see that the second highest ranked project in the roadway is the sewer highway improvements, which is the Sewer to Glen connection. Several $100 million project, will not fit easily into the tip, so that's why you don't see it at the tip. In addition, the fourth project down there is the Gamble Ingram planning environmental impact study. He's got a precursor to doing those sorts of projects in that area, so it makes more sense, regardless of the cost of those projects above, to do that study first, so that project is in there. But just wanted to, that's what those two sheets of paper are. So what we've done is we've plugged projects in with the dollar figures that we had, and schedule, et cetera. We have modified the format of the tip compared to what the current tip is. We have now roadway right up front. We used to have HSIP up front, but what Aaron and I thought made sense is put the three tables that AMAS controls the allocation of, put that right up front. very easy for everyone to see and understand. The first three tables in there are the ones that we control the allocation of, and then go on from there with the HSIP and the Table 7 projects, or projects that were in SBA funding, the railroad and transit, NHS, all of those tables that need to be in the tip but are not controlled by AMOS, they come after the three that we control the allocation of. The three that we had in the previous tip. We have broken out the, what used to be all inside the CMAC table, which was table 4. We took studies and plans, pulled that out as a separate table, and then after that one, you'll see the CMAC. So we used to have the NTP and other studies and plans inside the CMAC table previously, even though we had all sorts of different sources of funding in there. We put that as a separate table now, so it kind of makes sense. You can see.
So the things that are in the CMAC table now are actually the things that are CMAC funded? Only the things that are CMAC funded? No?
No.
Those are eligible CMAC funding. You guys only get 2.2
Yes.
million of true CMAC, so it pays for as much as it can. So the
Got it.
SIP primary measures at the top, 1.2,
Yeah.
and then there's about $1 million for other stuff. The problem we're running into is planning documents can no longer be funded with CMAC dollars, true CMAC dollars, unless they lead directly to a construction project.
Got it.
And that was a change, I think, done as part of the FAST Act a while ago. So it was causing some concern and issues when it came time to obligating the funds. There was a lot of confusion. It's CMAC, not CMAC, what is it? So we're hoping this maybe can help people.
Okay, so that's why we moved the plans to zero.
Right.
Okay.
The plans are still having the same source of funding, that part of our allocation that we put into what we were calling the CMAC table.
Yeah.
It just helps make it a little clearer.
Well, you probably still could use CMAC funding to fund a plan, like you said, if it leads
Leads to
to
construction.
a construction project, so.
But getting an understanding of what that means is really hard. Because say, for example, a PEL leads directly to a construction project, generally. I mean, that's what you do. But is there a time difference between when you do the plan and when you have to do construction that would directly relate to, is this fundable or not? We haven't really got clear specifications, so in general, most planning studies are not CMAC funded, just to kind of keep it easy.
Okay.
I mean, the MTP obviously leads to construction.
Yeah.
It's a roundabout.
But at what time, yeah,
Yeah,
does
so
it
we'll
have to
get-
do with the timeframe of this tip? Does it have to be, so.
There's nothing that's out there.
Okay, sorry.
Can I ask a stupid question?
Mr. Lincoln, yes?
As I'm reading through all these things, there's stuff in here that I don't even know what it is. Is there some place that tells me what it is? Like Dr. Martin Luther King Junior Drive extension? Extended where?
Yeah, so
It does.
if you have, just to explain the table a little bit, the ones that say MTP, those are obviously
Right,
projects that
I
are
know what's there.
MTP. The 100 ones are the short term, the 200 ones are the long term. The ones that don't have an MTP in front of it are the nominated projects. And the higher ranked nominated projects are in the tip with a little more explanation. We can share all those nomination forms with you, happy to, it's just, it's at least a ream of paper.
I was wondering if there was an easy place to look. I don't really want to.
That
Paper
one's
mining.
described in table 2, though.
That one didn't make it easy.
It did make it
Oh,
in,
maybe.
and I read it,
So.
so.
And you read it?
I did.
Basically,
Piece
it's
of
a
interest.
connection from about over at the Elmore intersection, coming
Piper.
around Piper. Okay, so moving along, plans and studies, CMAC, right after that is the Transportation Alternatives Program, and then pavement replacement, and then after that, all the rest of the tables are about the same, but they are all the ones that are outside of our AMS allocation. What we're asking for today is to release this for 30-day public review. The last two tips that we've done, the TAC has released them for public review as opposed to going up to the policy committee. So that's what we would like to do this time, because again, it's an opportunity for folks to get some eyes on it. And it also starts our clock rolling as opposed to waiting a little bit longer. So in reality, it's only a week because we delayed this meeting a week. But it would be nice to get it rolling. Happy to answer questions.
Ms. McCarthy?
I'd like to, is this an appropriate time for when to add a project or suggest one being moved up in the agreement?
I guess my thought is that that would be a good time to, it would be a good time to do it maybe in public comment period. Submit a formal comment from, whoever wants to submit a formal comment and say, I'd like to add this project or move that project or whatever. And then that would come back here to the TAC to indicate the policy committee.
Realistically, you've already missed it. That's what got us. This list of
Well,
projects.
nominating
It's-
projects.
She's talking about a project that's on this list that's just a little lower down. And the policy committee could add any project they want realistically, but we hope they would go off the ones that are nominated during the MTP. So it could be.
They get nominated early enough in the process so that they compete and score.
Yeah.
And then they get scored under the same criteria as all of the other projects.
So this is one that was nominated, I just wanted to suggest that it move up in rank.
It's already been scored.
It's
It's
already
one
been
that's
scored.
nominated, ranked, and scored, and just is a little farther down the line, and the request is moved up.
Got it. I was actually gonna ask a similar question, just in, I had some conversations with Aaron, he had given me the heads up on a couple of the non-motorized, asking my opinion if I had any background feedback, and I did not really have the opportunity to research them much until this week, and realized that there are some environmental barriers to some of them, like a creek, in one situation, and so I'm gonna have to recommend it not be included, at least on this table at this time, because there's gonna be some pretty significant environmental analysis that would have to be done to properly prohibit the project from moving forward, to be honest, so, yeah, so. Jerry?
I have a comment. I talked to Craig a little bit. It's the one project, it's under table 2. It's the fifth one down, Academy Drive, Vanguard Drive, area transportation.
There's some typos in there.
Well, that's not the typos.
Okay.
I didn't look that closely, but it's listing design in 2022. This, my understanding, this is, and what was nominated was the extension of DOT is finishing their project going underneath 92nd and stopping short of getting to Abbott Road. And this was a project that we had in the bond package that the Assembly took out last year, but we had, we have funding for design, and we're in design, and we've stopped it because of no further funding. So 2022 is not, we don't really need design money at that time. My understanding is the state is going to finish their project in 2000, or start their project in about 2022 for the
construction.
for the construction. It's going to stop short. It's going to make a mess of that intersection without this additional work. What we had planned was money in 2 incremental hits for right-of-way acquisition of $3 and $2 million, and then skip a year, and then construction, which would have been, we would have had funding sometime around 2021, 22, so we could tag onto that so we wouldn't have a mess out there. This $1 million in 2022 isn't going to help anybody. It's not for design. Although there is one issue on that, that if we do go with this funding, we're probably going to have to take a stop, and we'll go back and do an environmental document unless you have guys, the DOT has done the work, included that portion up to
It's
have.
specifically excluded from our environmental
So-
document at the request of the city at the time.
Okay, so then we'd have to have, did you get what kind of a determination? CADX or
EA.
EA?
We have an environmental assessment of the entire Seward Highway corridor that ran from Tudor Bridge all the way
Okay.
down to Rabbit Creek.
I don't think this would be a very controversial section but we would have to do a NEPA document to finish that off, and unless we find a Coke can from 1952 and some bullets or something on that order, like we did out here in Campbell. Foxholes and stuff like that. I can't, there's no wetlands, I don't think there's any major issue, but we have to do that and then go into the right-of-way acquisition phase and construction phase on that. I mean, what, as proposed here.
What do you want to, what?
If I came to the day 2019, I'd have 3 million, 2020, I'd have 2 million, and then I'd have to take a look for 22 of what our estimated construction costs, and I can get that for you.
Yeah, I guess
That, Jared,
my suggestion is to put in the public comment, sort of the same thing, or
Yes.
comment from the department exactly what
Okay.
would work best for you there, and then we
But-
can have it in the comment response table. and-
that won't work.
Yeah.
This is tip money, which would be federal money, and for us to spend federal money on this project, we have to start over with an environmental document before you can buy any right of way. And that's the problem.
And that's
If we restart this project, we have, because the other work was done with state dollars or city dollars, we would have to start all the way over with a new environmental document.
And I realize that, and
So,
there'd probably be, I don't know, 500,000 in there for an environmental document, and then the right-of-way. So it may be 2019, 500,000, and then going on.
I'd say put it in a public comment, like you said.
Yep.
Because, yeah, I have a couple tweaks and recommendations to these two. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to go through the scoring and see if some
No, I-
projects I think have to go
I
away.
understand.
There's another I can sub.
Just hoping you guys.
yeah, we looked at it.
Any other questions?
That was what we came up with.
Art,
We had to
sorry.
start all
I was just curious what the downtown circulation and pedestrian improvements were. It doesn't look like it got funded, but it's the third highest project on the non-motorized table.
There was a study to look at the non-motorized facilities downtown and make improvements to them. The problem is it's a study, and because bond money can't be used to fund studies, there was no indication of where the match would come from for that study. So all the studies had a hard time getting put into the TIP unless there was identified match.
So this is a study.
Yes.
What scoring did the studies go through, since they're their own separate table now? Did they get scored and ranked as part of the non-motorized section?
If they were nominated as a non-motorized one, they got scored in that, that's the criteria, and vice versa for the river.
Well, and I'm gonna make a wild guess here, that if these were things that were nominated by people, you were trying to succinctly name a project, because it probably wasn't a named project prior to this nomination. So, because I know that the downtown circulation pedestrian improvements study was mentioned specifically in the work session that we had, and it was in the presentation, and I asked the same question because I'd never seen the project before.
Yeah.
And the brief description it had and the lists of after the presentation, talked about looking at signal timing, pedestrian widths, all the different things in the it was looking at the overall downtown
Yeah.
area study.
I like the idea of it. That's,
I like the idea of it, I just don't know what we have space for in the right way to do.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
just curious.
Any other questions? All right, everybody's this way, so I want to make sure I'm not ignoring you. So yeah, I have some comments, but I'll submit them. Just so the Academy Vanguard Drive, I don't know if we're going to say release this to public.
That's a good point.
It says Academy is spelled incorrectly.
It's been fixed.
Okay, and then Brayton.
It's been fixed.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's the deal.
No, I was just making sure.
Aaron just did a phenomenal job getting this ready by last Thursday, because it was posted a week in advance. And, yeah, I mean, it was posted, there are a lot of typos in there, but getting it posted was the priority.
Yeah.
I believe he's got them all fixed now, but
Sweet.
he really did an incredible amount of work to get it posted in time, so I'm okay with typos.
I know. I was just.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it.
They released it in
because-
public. I was like, I'm looking at some of it,
Yeah.
but yeah, I know.
Any that you want to share in case we missed them, that's great.
Please do. Any typos or incorrect phases, it would help. Make sure you caught it all.
Table 3. NO00007 Old Stewart Highway project. This project. It's approved. Okay. Cool. You're fast fingering it. EJJE.
See on that part. Pretty sure we got them.
Yeah. Well, and also, does Excel actually show when you have these spellings
Sometimes. But like, for example, if you look at Fish Creek Trail Connection, it's this with a slash, HIS. It doesn't show that as an error. I don't know what to do with it.
Got it. Got it. All right. Any other questions or comments on this?
One more.
Yep.
Sorry. For the record, we have staff positions tied to the SIP mandated projects. So I hope for a speedy approval because we can't enter into a TORA, the DOT, until the TIP is approved. We need 2 months to do that, so hopefully this TIP is approved before November, or we won't be able to pay staff. So we're up against the time frame of transit.
Got it. So,
Would now be an appropriate time to move to release the 1922?
not yet. We have no open for public comment. Actually, my question for that is, I mean, this is 30 days. If we recommend release for public for 30 days, that would actually put it not on next month, so it would effectively be before
The
policy.
way we have around that is to be able to have our regular meeting, which is August 9th, and then we would have to continue the meeting to come in just for the one item to say, go forth and start the process or whatever. I mean, reality is, we have to still adjudicate all the comments that we get, make those changes. It might not be until September.
It's probably not going to be, and you,
September would be good.
Okay.
Past September. October, be okay, but then we're getting really close. Because it takes a couple months to get through ours and DOT's process for a TORA signature.
yeah. No,
Yeah, you know.
I get it. All right. Are there any other questions from the committee before I open it for public comment? No. All right, then are there any public comments at this time on this item?
I have a question.
State your
I'll
name
ask now.
correctly.
Do I need to say my name?
Yes.
John Bottleton. So I just looking at page 1 on the scoring. Fireweed Lane rehab is on there twice. Will we-
So there was a nominated project for Fireweed Lane, and then there was a project that was in the MVP. I don't know that they were too different.
Yeah, sorry, sir. The one in the MTP did not include a road diet in it. The one that was nominated did include a road diet, so the one that was incorporated into the TIP basically combined the projects because they do the same thing except for the road diet. So you know, when staff was looking at it, the group was looking at it, they decided the road diet one made the most sense because of the success on Spinard, and we hope to have continued success on Fireweed. So it was just put in there as the road diet one.
Why is it 47 scored left?
I can't speak for how the other members scored it.
Likelihood of public controversy.
Well, so that would have knocked it down, and they're separate, okay? But just to offer, having been part of the Spinard Road project battle for decades, and Lynn Boots, who opposed it strongly, sent me a note a month or so ago and said, John, I love the Spinard Road project. Hell has frozen over. She's a Fireweed landowner, so I expect that controversy will diminish substantially because Spinard is working very well.
We would like to hope so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That's impressive.
We'll be fired. Part of the deal. It's yours.
Yeah, in our section, this includes all of Fireweed, well, at least from Spinard all the way to the Seward Highway, which is part, portion of it, at least is municipal owned, so this is a combination municipal and DOT. So,
No, it's all municipal, or all
You're right.
DOT.
It's gonna be
all
all
DOT.
municipal when we're done. We're gonna give it away.
After you construct it.
After we're done constructing it.
We're gonna discuss that at another meeting, Jim. Are there any other public comments?
That's tomorrow's meeting.
Sorry, I'm commenting to staff more than public, just to make sure everyone understands the time frame we're doing. Aaron, don't get in with DOT yet. Because we still have to get air quality determination done on this document, and we still have to go through the assembly for approval of this document before we send it on. So we're not looking at a September timeframe for approval. We're looking at substantially later, depending on how long it takes. So, just as a heads up, it's a little longer than September. So if anyone can help push it through the assembly, because that takes the time, that would really help as well.
Any other public comments? All right, hearing none, now would be a good time.
Oh, now I can.
Yes.
I would like to move to release the 19 to 22 public review draft tip for public comment.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Poe, seconded by Mr. Rudolph. Are there any objections? All right. Hearing none, we are so moved. And please let this be your notice that because this is now open for public comment, we all have our 30 days to provide our comments. So get them in, please. All right, next item before us is the 2015-2018 administrative modification number 20.
Remotely, have in mind.
Yeah.
Just a few changes to reflect here. And now we have information in the memo that should help you have to go looking around for it. Table 3 reflects some additional money needed for design work on the pavement replacement projects. So there's an increase in that, a little over $1 million. Table 4, additional money needed for design work on some non-motorized projects. You can see that there, it's another just under $1 million increase. Table 4A, which is the transitional incentive program, has funded the Mountain Drive Pathway Reconstruction Project for additional design. And then in Table 10, which is the pavement replacement program, just reflected a change from the Sherman Eye of the pavement replacement project from originally it said Fireweed from Martin to Stewart Highway, now it should be Fireweed from Spinard to Stewart Highway. So, all the figures are such that we need policy committee approval, so we're asking for the TAC to recommend that approval. That's it.
Any questions? Mr. Post?
Excuse me, the added and the added and the added. Where's the money come from?
Question to the couch.
Things weren't costing as much as we originally anticipated, like the Bradford Creek Road rehabilitation project that came in at like $1 million and some odd under, plus various other projects here or there that have come in under. So it kind of freed up money for the additional money we see here.
Any other questions?
Are these all cost overruns required to go to these, or is this just a decision of where you put the extra money?
I don't have it in front of me, but do we have, I think we already dealt with the cost overruns, because those are it's just pavement replacement, so that's just a decision to add in some more design work for starting new pavement projects. They were the quickest ones to be able to get obligated in time, because we're kind of at our limit right now to get any new projects or other type of projects obligated.
To get obligated this year? Gotcha.
Any other questions? Are there any questions or comments from the public on this item? Hearing none, the matter lies in committee.
Recommend approval to submit it to the MX Policy Committee for their approval.
Moved by Mr. Hanson, seconded by Mr. Hanson. Are there any
one.
We still have 4 months
You
after.
still have a form, she has an employee, little 20-year recognition.
Oh, really?
He started when he was 7.
Awesome. I actually, in my time here, I've gotten to do 35, 30, top 20, 25, I'm amazed. Ralph, I told, you know how you make me feel old, when I gave a 35-year pin when I was only 34 years old. And I'm like, you do realize you worked in municipality longer than I've been alive. All right, the next item before us is
Sounds like age
item 5C, the complete streets policy.
All right, I'll just start and then let Joni jump in here. Basically, as you remember, the Complete Streets policy went out for a 30-day public review in March. These are the comments that have been received. Came back and we went through there and we worked on that, the staff responses. So I don't know if you have any details you want to show or share specifically, or you want to do that in the I'll let you.
Yeah, so we had 117 comments. And, just, you know, it's been out for a 30-day public review, the public has seen it. We have comments from multiple agencies, and the public, and, our BPAC submitted comments. So, do you have any questions or specific ones you want to go over? Or one of those today? We are hoping that your request is to review it and approve to send to the policy committee to review, since technically this committee has been part of the public comment period, but I feel like we want to spend longer on it. That's fine too. Up to you. Anyone have any specific questions on any of the comments, or?
Question is, I guess, to the committee, how we want to deal with the comments. Usually we'll say whether we'll go page by page, if there's any specifics we want to discuss on each page. I was going through them earlier just to dig through, looking at their responses to the comments and everything like that, but I guess if we want to go through page by page. Everybody looking at that? All right. Well, I'm gonna say page 1. Are there any comments on page 1 that anybody wants to discuss? Ms. Bach, any of yours? And your responses, you're okay. Aaron, any of yours? No, I'm kidding.
Mine's
No
not-
change.
Not answering that.
Yeah.
But
Oh, you had 14 pages of them. It's 4.
Can I ask about that first page?
Sure.
In the middle there,
Yeah.
where we requested safer, and I think that we requested it based upon the notion that to imply safe versus unsafe leaves us open to liability, as opposed to safer, safe and safer. Why would we not want to go ahead and consider that? An additional letter?
The reason being is that when we drafted the policy, we tried to stay consistent with the policies that exist already. And the National Complete Streets Coalition, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the Federal Highways Administration, they all use that same language. So they use safe, not safer. So our interpretation is that that's the standard language that's used for Complete Streets policy, and I don't know that we should want to deviate from that But, it's up to the policy committee if they wanna change that to safer, then we can change it.
And that additional R doesn't seem to change any of the textual elements of it, but that additional R deviating, I guess, from federal language is considered onerous.
Well, it seems to me that since it's on the U.S. Department of Transportation's definition of complete streets, that why would we in Alaska deviate from their definition? Or
Because
Federal
the
Highways
National
Administration
Complete
definition.
Streets Policy and the nice folks at the Department of Transportation don't carry an underlying obligation for liability because they're never the person or party stamping or actually designing the projects in question. As a designer, that carries a level of obligation beyond making it safer, that I'm supposed to guarantee that it is safe. That is a standard that is impossible to achieve with the street.
Well, I'm not gonna argue with you. It's a policy, Complete Streets policy, it's not a design, and this is the language that is adopted throughout the country as standard language. So again, if you would like to recommend that you change it, that's fine. It's not a decision it's not my decision, it's the policy committee's decision. So, but that was our reasoning.
I have a little bit, I mean, I know where you guys are coming from, and I get it, because there's a reason why we don't like you to use the words unsafe or dangerous in a lot of our language. But reading that sentence and that definition, to enable safer access, I hate when people say that, because I'm like, safer than what? It leads, there's a comparison in there when there really isn't anything to compare to. So I don't know that that's exactly the word I'd want to use either. It's not perfect, but just when I use the word safe, more safe, less safe, I don't know, safer, it's touchy language. Are there any other questions on page 1?
Let the lawyers have fun.
Okay, page 2. Any discussion on those questions on page 2?
Just wondering why the staff doesn't want us to use NACTO design guidelines.
What comment is that?
Well, there's a couple of different ones that all are, probably number 18 is most relevant.
Is that on page 3?
But I know that it carries back to a couple of earlier ones as well. There's a difference between a design guideline and a design standard.
So
And,
are you looking at the comment 18?
About eight.
Eight.
Page 2.
It's the, I think, so the comment is referring to, instead of using design standards on section, on section 7 in the policy, that we change that to read design,
Best practices.
right. references, or the comment had specified using references. And it's my feeling that reference is a little bit more, this is a little bit more loose, and standards stating that we'd like to see certain standards met, but if you just list something as a reference, to me that means, use it or not, we don't really care. And what we're trying to say here is that we have guides that we feel are useful, and they don't include just NACDOT, there's a lot of other guides listed. So we're just trying to be a little bit more, we'd like to see these used. Reference, the word reference versus the word standard. So, again, that was my feeling, but have different feelings.
So I'll respond as to why I put that in. When you put design standards, that limits not using things like NACDOT because they're not design standards, they're design guidelines. So the point was to try and be all-encompassing of everything. So maybe the best bet is change it to design best practices or something like that can encompass it all. Because if we go through and just say design standards, well, that's going to eliminate some of the things that are reference material, guideline materials versus standards.
NACDOT design guidance, the ITE design guidance for non-motorized users are all design guidelines, they're not design standards. As such, by your policy that you're putting forward right now, those would all be excluded from our use. And we're suggesting that's a bad direction to go.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood the comment. I understand what you're saying, and that would sound fine to me. If you wanted to call those design best practices, to be inclusive of all the guides.
I think at least, I'll say, Joni, there's a lot of different materials that they may have what appear to be design standards within the set of guidelines, but we're getting into the nomenclature, but the titles of them are that they are guidelines. They are user guides, they're reference guides, that they are not called standards. And if you say that we have to use these standards, there are certain things that are adopted standards. Some of the FHWA adopted standards actually don't include some of these best practice. So I think it's getting into the nomenclature of that title of standards. So I think that really, if you said encourage the use of national design best practices, that's probably better language.
Okay, so maybe rename 7 design best practices. The whole
She's over on section 2E.
That was on 2E for that, yes. And then when you're in section 7, maybe rather than calling it design standards, yes, probably design best practices. Is that,
Design best
more
practices.
consistent?
That would give us more flexibility.
Sounds great to me.
Jumping down to comment 11 here. So the policy as written, it would apply to our type projects? Is that correct? Our
Yes.
resurfacing projects?
Yes.
Is
No.
that?
It would.
It should not?
It would. Not for our standards.
Okay. So it sounds like you have a difference here. I'm confused.
As far as I know, when ours are included in the policy, or would be included in the policy, there is a guidance here, this will get into another item on the agenda too, but incorporating on-road bicycle networks into resurfacing projects put out by FHWA. This was forwarded to me by a design engineer, and it was an example of how we can use one of our projects to incorporate some good bicycle in design if we're restriping any ways that helps us save money to do that. But Jim, you're saying we can't do that?
Nope.
And why is that?
It's inconsistent with our current policy and restriction.
Okay, well, that's another item on the agenda. Then the pre-construction manual that you use now is, when did that, what is the date on that? When did that?
It's been being updated on an ongoing basis. We're currently doing a review of a couple of the key sections in question right now.
Okay, because another item on the agenda is to encourage the update of that pre-construction manual. And that was actually suggested to us by a DOT engineer. So to give you guys more flexibility, or to give the design community more flexibility to do things like this. So, but as far as the policy is concerned, as it stands, like, I guess it would incorporate that once the pre-construction manual is updated.
Well, somebody's gonna find a whole bunch more budget.
So I guess my question kind of stems from, by adopting this and having it apply to 1R projects, do we then essentially negate UMass's ability to fund 1R projects? Or for that matter, negate 1R projects from moving forward within the MPO?
Or you change your pre-construction manual.
I don't have the authority to do that.
Yep.
There's nobody in this room that does.
So it sounds to me like that's a concern. We can't resurface our roads within the MPO.
Technical issue, I guess, well, if it's an issue that needs to be brought to the policy committee, because I don't think it's anything that.
The policy committee doesn't have that authority either.
Well, I'm saying the conflict, if there is a perceived conflict in the language, I don't know that I see it that clear cut saying that it's gonna, make it so that we can't do 1R projects. I mean, if you're doing a resurfacing project on Tudor Road where you have curb and gutter to curb and gutter taken, I don't see this as saying that you can't resurface Tudor Road by not providing, well, it all depends on what's considered part of our plan, our non-motorized plan, and what's going to be applied, but it's not going to impact every resurfacing project in DPO, so. I think it's being a bit too literal, but.
Well, the issue is later on in the policy, it says any deviations from the policy, you have to get prior approval by the policy committee. So if you're going through and not doing like non-motorized treatments on a 1R project, are you deviating from this policy and you need to get prior approval from the policy committee before you can move forward with the 1R project?
Good question.
Yeah, is there a definition of deviating? 'Cause isn't it just supposed to be, these are supposed to be considered for every project? Not every project's gonna have all the bells and whistles for Bike Head.
But because that language later talks about deviating from it, it kind of ties it in a lot more that these are required versus more of something to consider as you're going through project development. I bring that up only because I was looking at it, I'm like, wait a minute, now we're gonna have to go through and get policy committee approval for everything if we want to move forward on anything that doesn't do complete streets improvements.
Well, for AMAS funded project, the idea of the policy is to set a policy so that when projects are being designed, all roads are at least being considered. We're not saying that every road needs to have all the bells and whistles of complete streets, but at least to be considerate of the different modes that are trying to access that roadway. Yes, that is what this policy is trying to do. If we set a policy with like 0 teeth, it's just an exercise in utility. It needs to have some teeth. You can't strip it of all of its otherwise it's just a waste of our time.
And the policy as written will have unintended consequences.
Well, it hopefully will get more people thinking about designing for all modes. And the reason why we didn't want to exclude the repaving on 1R projects was because and make the roadway safer for walkers and bicyclists. And those are included in one-hour projects. But I don't want to exclude one-hour projects from the policy. So I don't know who has the authority to change the pre-construction manual. Who does have the authority? The governor?
Headquarters,
Headquarters?
Alaska DOT.
I was under the impression that they were using a pre-construction manual that was outdated. Is that?
That would be an incorrect assumption on your part.
Okay. Do you know what the date is of the one that they're using?
The latest update was back in December.
And that covers the,
Just because US DOT recommends something doesn't mean the state of Alaska incorporates it in their design standards.
that covers the preventative maintenance, the PM section, is, they're using the most updated.
Most updated by what? I'm not sure what you're trying to talk about. is
I know,
updated.
I'm having a hard time trying to talk about it too, because I'm not a design engineer, but, the update that we were given was the 1140 preventive maintenance PM project.
Mhm.
This is what you're using?
That's currently in place, yes.
That's not what,
It's not what you want, but that's what the state of Alaska.
it's not what I want, it's not what I was told by design engineers. So none of you knew that, what I want. But,
Bottom line is, this is, it would be an AMAT policy, and if the policy committee decides that's what they want to do, and it precludes AMATs from funding one-hour projects, that's what the policy committee wants to do, so.
Well, it
We have to
doesn't-
leave it, we have to offer our technical advice here, and funnel it up to the policy committee.
Well,
They
and I-
understand the ramifications and go from there.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it precludes.
I don't
There
think it does
is, I mean, it does, I'd say it does add additional barriers in the sense that if there is the ability to accommodate any of these complete streets, and there's any recommendations, like say a road already has a widened shoulder, I mean, perfect example, we did incorporate something in a resurfacing project with Raspberry Road. We had pretty significant improvements that happened with the 1R project on Raspberry Road. And there wasn't a complete streets policy in place that said that we had to do it, but we did do it, you know, but, you know, it may not be the case everywhere that we're able to. It looks like this would require, yes, a bit more documentation to say that things were considered and why they were excluded, either because they were so expensive, they had an environmental impact, they had significant utility rotation, something like that, and that could be approved. I mean, at the policy level. So if that money still wanted to be used, it does add, I'm not gonna disregard that it adds an extra hurdle, and I think the policy committee will have to be educated to that there are extra hurdles that could slow up the use of money and perhaps incentivize not using as much of that money to do those sorts of projects. But if that is the will of the body, then that would be the will of the body. So I just say to staff that they need to be aware of those issues. Are there any other on page 2? So it looks like the recommendation is going to be to remove green roads from everything.
yes.
That hasn't happened yet though, in this draft that we have.
This is the copy that was sent out to the public.
Okay.
I've not changed it.
Got it. I was gonna say, because I still see green roads in there.
Yeah.
I was just making sure. I knew that we discussed that at our last meeting. Okay. Anything on page 3? So I actually have a question. With some of the performance indicators. I understand what your comment was saying, Aaron, because you're asking miles of new or reconstructed sidewalk. How is this indicating? But I guess if we
The reason I put that in is because if you say number of new or reconstructed curb ramps, it doesn't get you anything. You have to compare it to something. New compared to what is currently existing, so you can see what improvements you've been making over time. Just saying you put X number of new sidewalks in for people, they're not gonna have any idea what that means. They need a reference point to it. And that's all I was trying to get at, is to make it an actual performance measure, you need a comparison to something.
Well, miles,
And it's not on all of them, so multimodal level of service you don't need a comparison to, but it's miles of new or reconstructed sidewalks compared to what's already there, what we have right now. So we have 100, and we put in 5. Okay, now people can see the percentages that we're working with here. If you just say we put in 5 new miles of reconstructed sidewalk, most people have no idea what that's gonna look like.
yeah. But at least, well, I get where you're coming from. I mean, but to be honest, when we have as many miles of trails and sidewalks in here, if you say 5 and we already have however many hundreds we already have, it's gonna seem like it's pretty small. But it's still, I think the new or reconstructed is really showing that you've made progress and that you are either adding new or reconstructing existing sidewalk. So I guess I can see it either way.
I mean, my big thing is those aren't really performance measures then.
Well, they're
The section says performance measures, and those are a very specific way of doing things as demonstrated by the performance measures you guys do have to do that are required by FHWA.
yeah.
So if you want to call them something like performance indicators, like it says in the sentence, I think that's okay.
And that was your recommendation, and they accepted that recommendation.
Yeah, and then the other ones, they were just saying, so it kind of came into a roundabout way of getting everyone on board.
Yeah. So right now, though, really the staff recommendation is to rename them indicators rather than measures. So, to me, the indication that at least you're reconstructing new ramps, you're either putting in new ramps, reconstructing ramps, putting in new sidewalks, reconstructing sidewalks, same goes for crosswalks, this sort of thing. It is an indicator, at least, that you're accomplishing either additions or reconstructions. I think you're correct in the sense of what you talk about, measures as opposed to indicators, for sure. Any other questions or comments on page 3? No, we're going to go on page 4.
I agree with number 29, Aaron's comment. I think the land use plan, goals, and policies, the way that it's written, even the recommendation is going to be hard to track that. The recommendation now is to change it to number of completed transportation projects that demonstrate how they are meeting current land use plan goals. I don't know how many land use plan goals there are directly related to transportation.
Quite a few.
But for a complete streets policy to implement that, like, I don't have I like the idea of tying it to land use. I just think this is going to be very difficult to show.
Or measure.
Yeah.
If there's another option that people think makes more sense, my thought was, as a performance measure, you could list a plan or sorry, you could list a transportation project that demonstrated somehow in the project that it was working to meet land use goals. So it would just be a list of projects that, as a performance measure, so like, for example, Spinard Corridor Plan, that's a, or, sorry, say Chugach Way got redone or something. That's an example of a project that is working to implement land use goals for Spinard.
Because it's a neighborhood center, high-dense walkable area, so we would want those types of improvements there? Is that?
Yeah, or if it's a project that already appeared in a land use plan, like that's a transit-oriented development plan. Any road project that appeared, like say Fireweed, for example, if Fireweed was redone, that would be a good example.
Well, there's a number, like the UMed district plan. I mean, that's the district plan, but it discusses land uses, and it had transportation recommendations for some of the pedestrian connections, bike connections, and road connections in the UMed district.
Right, yeah, like our, I forget what they call it, the sections of the city's plans, you know, like all
Yeah.
those have specific recommendations, but the land use plan, I think that this would be very subjective to say that you're implementing a land use policy or goal by having some sort of complete streets element of a transportation project. I think you could draw the conclusion, but you're gonna have to tease those out of every project, and someone's gonna have to make a call whether or not it's directly relating to the land use plan. And maybe it's a good first step to get to where we wanna go, I don't know.
Yeah,
Suggestions?
it is a tough one
I mean, sorry, to speak on that one, that one's a little difficult because you technically would say all of your projects or funded by AMATs are supposed to be doing implementing of the land use goals and policies. That's why when you do the MTP, you do a pretty rigorous screening of all the projects and how they match up with the adopted land use goals and policies that are out there for the various projects, including the land use plan. So what project would not help implement the land use plan goals and policies that exist out there? I mean, you could technically make the case for anything. I could sit here and come up with any project and say, here's how it meets it, in some way, shape, or form.
though. Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I'm just saying it's something to think on what are we trying to achieve out of it, to say we are implementing our land use plan and goals and policies. So how best can we do that, you know, get that out to people to let them know?
Through the chair.
Yes.
There is there's an action item in the land use plan that calls for, I believe, that calls for creating a baseline of infrastructure that is needed, now, where everything is out there now, and what's needed to fulfill the land use plan. And it could be something like that. I do think some kind of baseline is needed, so it can be quantified, you can show what actually has been done by the project's improvement. Maybe that's a way.
I get where you're coming from. I mean, I can kind of see it from all aspects. I get that it's something that it's good to try to look at, but I get where Aaron's coming from, because technically these projects shouldn't be being recommended or funded if they're not actually moving forward the land use policies and the goals. I mean, really, goals that are, so it's kind of, we're talking about having teeth and having that sort of thing. Is this, I don't know that this is really measuring anything in addition to some of the other ones that have already been. Because if there are projects that are not consistent, they likely shouldn't be being funded. That's a tough one. But I guess either way, I think I like the revised language more.
I do like it better.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have something in there about land use. Let's work on it in the future.
Okay. Anything on page 5?
Just, I guess, I would caution from using the word shall in policy document. So, I guess I'm looking at item number 40. So, I guess I wouldn't support that change of encourages to shall.
And also just to clarify, it's, staff didn't recommend using shall, but I just said, it's not really my decision, so if the policy committee wants to use it, they can change it, but yeah.
Where was that recommended? Oh, is this encouraging for
Yeah.
the above principles to be used? Yeah. I think that's one that should definitely be brought to the policy committee's attention, because that's another one that when it comes down to the nomenclature of the shalls, shoulds, and all those different things, which is also kind of something that's going to be discussed a little bit later when it comes to the arrows. Shall is a very, it's a tough word. And in policy,
It's policy, it's not regulations, and it shouldn't be used.
that's true. Yeah, I think that's
Shall,
actually.
shall is not a tough word, it means you shall.
But like she
That's
said,
the only
but
thing you
if
can
that-
do.
Exactly.
But if
That's
it's
why
not
it
a
should be
policy
used.
and not a regulation, I mean, in code, specifically
Codes.
shall is
Yeah.
used because it is a
Yeah, this is
regulation, it's
policy.
not a
That's
regulation.
exactly right.
So
that's-
I think that we should advise the policy committee to that nuance, so they
Yes.
understand what they're being asked.
Yes. Any other discussion on page 5 of comments? All right, page 6.
Just real fast, 41, the same kind of recommendations being, I
Yes.
think it's, so it's, I just want to make sure it's
Yes.
anywhere in that statement.
Green Roads rating system on number 41 that it references in that, that's a proprietary system that can't be shared publicly once it's filled out. You-
What are you talking about?
Under 41, Jamie's comment, it's the very bottom line of it, it's talking about the Green Roads rating system.
Yeah.
The problem with Green Roads is it's a proprietary system that once the checklist is filled out, it cannot be shared with the public.
Well, all references to green roads are being removed from the policy.
In which
anyway,
case, as
so-
long as we do that, but that's why it needs to be done. Because it's a proprietary system and they write in their policy, say if you're using their checklist, you cannot release the checklist to the public after it's been completed. Really?
So we can use federal money to fund that then?
No.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean,
It's because it's proprietary and they want to protect their proprietary system.
I guess so.
And
Does LEED do that? LEED doesn't. I mean, when you do
Lead
LEED
doesn't do
accreditation,
that, but
that's
Green Roads is currently doing that.
interesting.
Matter of fact, they sent me a cease and desist order. They told me to quit sharing information after we put it in their checklist.
Got it.
So, I am far more familiar with it than I wanted to be. Because I took it to the AG and he said I should stop. Pretty much. Stop that, Jim.
Okay, this isn't really, I guess. I think it's getting a bit pedantic to say current and future projects, because if we just say projects, doesn't that mean all projects projects, which means
Mhm.
that comment number 44, that was within the context sensitivity, adding, implementation of current and future projects. I would think that just by saying projects, it means all projects from the time that this is adopted on, but I guess that's my assumption. I just think it gets a little, adding the language to say current and future doesn't really add much value, but I'm not opposed to adding it either, I just don't know that it adds a lot of value. And number 45, as far as the number of complete street projects in underserved or underinvested communities, is that going to be based upon, GIS data? I'm going to assume that's going to be based upon some sort of measurable data that you can provide that information, correct?
Well, so currently with our non-motorized plan, compiled with Vision Zero data, we are identifying, we will have a better idea of where those communities, where the boundary, what our areas are that include underserved and underinvested communities. So what we have right now are the GIS maps that Terry created for us a while back. I don't know if those are sufficient for what we need, especially when you're scoring projects. So I hope to have a much better idea of where those areas are and around what corridors they are in our September non-motorized plan draft. So I would imagine when we're look against performance measures. So when we're looking at the streets or the complete streets projects that are completed, we should be able to identify if they are in an area that was identified as underserved, underinvested.
Okay. I guess my only recommendation, I don't know if we need, I don't know that we need a definition somewhere, but that's just, I guess, a question, or whether that's. Maybe not within this policy, but I definitely think that if we're going to be doing this as indicators, we're going to need to define it somewhere as to how we're considering this and what we're comparing it to. And because every year GIS within the data, those boundaries in those areas could be changing, is what I'm saying. As the city grows and develops and changes, so it's just something to consider that there needs to be, I guess, a defined way on how we're going to be identifying, how we're getting this indication, so.
Right. It's also a little bit tricky because as we were recommended to, I think by the FHWA rep when he was here, we were trying to include those maps in our public involvement plan, and they recommended that we did not because, a lot of people don't like to be identified as, living in an area that's underserved, and they don't want that blasted out as public documents. So I guess it's something that we will put internally or have it, at least internally. I don't know if we'll even show it in our non-motorized plan, but at least we'll have the data internally.
Well, I guess, along with that then, if we're not gonna have maps that demonstrate where these areas are, is it something that we should be trying to measure and communicate publicly and identify those areas?
Well, this came up in our certification. We were told, hey, the maps look great, wonderful, but don't include them in the public documents for those reasons. They're not credit, not shame.
Yeah.
So they were happy that we had them and we used them to rank and score projects, but not to have it posted on the website and all that sort of stuff. So it's all public information that we got to create the maps, but that was really clear in certification.
Odd because we create those maps and put them publicly through FTA.
I figured, I know, because you have to.
And we're required to do so.
And I'm trying to remember, but I think it was our.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, I just want to make sure that we're
FTA and FHWA.
Percent is more in the.
Not talking
Oh,
to each other.
FTA and
Does that
FRA.
happen?
Yeah.
Right hand, left hand?
I feel like I beat that one. All right, any, next page, page 7. So comment number 48, Michelle, is once again, the whole shall and must and wills. But like you said, the policy committee, and taking the back to the policy. So, yeah.
Where's the, is there a shall in that one?
No, just the comment.
Oh.
The comment itself, you know, says according to Smart Growth America, the most effective complete street policies include clear vision statements that future projects shall or must consider the needs. And so they changed.
Didn't even respond to that.
Sorry, 48 is a little bit of a weird one because it says that it's directing what you're going to be doing on the tip scoring category. So I'm wondering if we have that kind of interaction with other stuff that AMS does, because it's weird to have a separate policy like this be directing what the tip scoring is supposed to be doing.
So we did get a couple of comments that were along those lines, and my response was that the policy itself does not have any influence over the TIP projects and how they're scored, but that if the TIP criteria, once it's revised, wants to incorporate anything from the Complete Streets policy and use as scoring criteria, then that would be how the Complete Streets policy might influence the TIP. But the policy itself is not going to influence TIP projects or TIP scoring.
I mean, it says here at a bullet point that projects that clearly follow the complete street guidelines will receive full points in the tip scoring category which pertains to complete streets.
Yeah, that was my, I'm assuming that the TIP criteria is going to have some sort of category that includes complete streets. Is that wrong? Please strike that.
I'm not gonna prejudge what they're gonna have.
Yeah.
So maybe
It's a likely bet, but.
It may be, I mean,
just take it out. I mean,
maybe make a recommendation instead of having it as kind of a mandate in this policy, because you're putting it in here saying this, you know, without saying shall, that's basically what it is it's gonna happen is you can, as staff, this is gonna create a lot of problems for us for tip scoring criteria, because if we don't follow this, and quite frankly, I can make the case that any project follows a complete street policy and should get full points on that.
I know that for other MPOs, they have complete streets criteria that are pertaining to complete streets. So I don't know what the TIP criteria is going to have. So maybe a better answer is just, we'll just ignore this until, I mean, not this an answer, but we'll just put this aside until the TIP criteria is rewritten. Then at that point, whoever revises it can use complete streets or not.
My recommendation is put in something here, recommend that the tip criteria, when it's updated, include a scoring category for complete streets.
Yes, that was what my recommendation was.
Because then you can say, okay, we're referencing what the complete streets policy says, or you don't even have to put it in the complete streets policy, put it in your comment response, and that covers it if you don't want the extra work and stuff. And I think that helps with staff to be like, here's the direction you need to be going in when you're updating the tip criteria.
I think that's a good idea. Yes, that's good.
Sorry, I hope I didn't sound like I was being mean when I said that, but.
No, that was where I was drafting that as you were saying it. I was writing it, saying recommend on the tip criteria is updated and includes the complete streets. Okay. Page 8.
budget, Craig?
Oh, sure.
I mean, that is something to discuss. I mean, I don't know if in the update of the non-motorized plan, if that's included in the non-motorized plan, to have those numbers for, I guess, the number of miles of bike lanes, bike trails, separate, sidewalks, all that jazz, so that you can say that that baseline is in there, and that these indicators are gonna be in addition to that, or what, so.
Most of this stuff we will have through the non-motorized plan, or just the Division 0 gave us some baseline data too. I don't really know multimodal level of service. I don't know, do we even have that measured? Does the model look at that?
No.
No, so we don't have that, so that may be one that we can't measure.
Still being created at the national level, it hasn't been counted.
Yeah.
So it's hard to have it in a year.
I think we have miles of bike infrastructure and trails. We do not have accurate miles of sidewalk right now. Our GIS data is lagging behind, but updating that GIS for all of those facilities is the #1 goal of this non-motorized plan, and then several of the other plans for new transportation plan. Because it's just out of date and it's causing us a lot of problems. Hoping that through that effort, we should achieve some more use.
Okay, so, I just want to make sure that with the recommendation, when it says within 1 year, complete streets policy adoption, AMAT shall obtain and report baseline data for each of these performance measures. So for every single one of these that we're adding, in looking at this, some of these are already being tracked as far as, what crash rates, injury rates, all those sorts of things. But like you said, the multimodal level of service, the level of traffic stress, the existing miles of sidewalks, the number of curb ramps, we can tell you, I can tell you how many painted crosswalks we have. We do have an inventory of that. But some of these may be difficult, so just if we're recommending adoption of saying within a year, we're gonna have these, we should think about the level of work that's gonna be needed to get some of these. And when you say total miles of new bike lanes, do we wanna say bike lanes, or do we want to use are we specifically only measuring bike lanes? Because that wouldn't take into account if there's any new trails, if there's any new any sort of bike infrastructure, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. It might be better to just use bike facilities or on-road bike facilities.
Yeah.
I will ask our non-motorized consultants and see if they have a suggestion.
Yes.
Sorry, I keep commenting, but I just want to remind everyone, AMATS also has federally required performance measures that they are working on right now.
Yes.
So those are taking a lot of time and effort because they also have to do a system performance report as part of the MTP update that's happening right now, as well as the transit asset management plan. And so adding on this, just kind of be aware of the amount of demand on staff time, along with everything else that's required from the feds to get done within a year. That's a lot, since we're in the middle of a TIP and MTP update in addition to everything else.
That's why I brought it up. So, it's always good to have a target, but I just make sure that we recognize, I guess, timeline and level of effort, because it may not be doable to get to that within a year. Okay. Page 9, we're at almost 4 o'clock, we've got a lot left to go. If nobody has any comments, I'm trying to move us along. I read through Matt's. I appreciated the edits to those ones. I did go through all of those. Are there any on page 9? 62.
This should be appropriately consistently punctuated as well as empathically alike. It's a good sentence.
Somebody could hit F7 in Word.
Thank you for accommodating my one edit and removing a pen period. Page 11.
How you doing, sunshine?
Just fine.
Page 12.
have a history of underinvestment, won't that be hard to, again, set a boundary for and measure that?
Okay, sorry, just let me read it.
Kind of related to your
Areas that,
earlier.
yes, I don't think that, I feel pretty confident that once we're finished with the Sound Motorized effort, incorporating their data and the Vision Zero data, we're gonna have a pretty good idea of where our areas are, that are identified as those. I think when we move forward, explore more projects in the future, we should be able to look at the project, where is it located, look at our maps and say, yes, this is within this area, or no, this is not within an area. So,
I think the data, what we were discussing, is the data will likely be available, it will not be something that's, we post those maps to the public.
So it will be a GIS point.
yeah, it'll be I mean, unless we move towards what FTA is doing and.
Well, I just don't know how you would define history of systemic underinvestment. Like, what does that even mean?
How is it different than EJ populations that currently exist right now?
Yeah, like, those are easy to define through the census. And when we typically talk about underrepresented groups, those are who we talk about. But areas of underinvestment, you would have to improve that other areas have invested more, and these areas were disproportionately affected somehow.
Yeah,
The-
so perhaps revise that language to be more consistent with,
I would say something like environmental justice areas, if that's what we're using for the, whatever we're using for the MTP, I'd say try and link that together.
I mean, it's already being used for the TIP, for example.
yeah.
EJ is one of the highest scoring ones you can get. So how is it different than what we're already doing right now?
So here's the question, how are environmental justice areas different than areas that have had a history of systematic underinvestment?
Well-
Aren't they kind of one and the same?
One is defined and the other one isn't. How do you determine what's underinvestment?
Yeah, I think
We
what
don't have
Bart
a-
was
that term
saying
is
is that
undefined.
when you're trying to say that there's systemic underinvestment, that's another area, like where you have to have like a baseline, I mean, really of
Yeah.
saying, you know, and look at, okay, so you have all of Anchorage and you have, I hate to say this, but in recent years and in oncoming years, there has been a lot of investment going on in Spenard, you know, and comparatively looking over the last few years, you could say that there are other areas of town that have now had lack of investment when there's been a lot of focus in that area. And could you compare and say that maybe historically it had systematic underinvestment in the area? I don't know, but there has to be, to me, that implies there has to be a comparison. Whereas when you're looking at the environmental justice, there are definitions as to what low-income populations, you know, I mean, there's definitions and there, like you said, through, what do you call it?
Census,
Census
yeah,
data,
yeah.
you know, we can actually have districts that we identify where those areas are. I think it'd be very hard to kind of quantify an area that has historic systematic underinvestment. I think once again, it's terminology. One actually has a definition within the nomenclature of what we're discussing.
Okay, do you think if we just cut it off at vulnerable users and strike and have a history of systematic underinvestment, maybe we do have a good idea of where our most vulnerable populations are.
Have we defined what the vulnerable populations are?
Yes, there's more definitions in our non-motorized plan, but typically it's people who don't have access to a vehicle. I suspect that's a huge indicator for Anchorage. We do have that data. Most vulnerable population, also low income. Those are big two. So there are other ones.
Yeah, I mean, we look at like minority population, poverty, car ownership, things like that, but I mean, they are like underrepresented or vulnerable, but we just define them as environmental justice areas, or a term where it's defined as well. You can define it.
We're just gonna ignore it.
I'm flexible with other words.
Feedback has it. That name, it's like number 40.
mean, it should be consistent with what the TIP and the MTP are identifying as these populations, I would think.
Yeah,
And that-
so, Aaron, I know.
It's raining, I'm sorry. I just did this to the tip. When we looked at the EJ population represented in Anchorage, it was almost every single location in Anchorage was an EJ population.
Okay.
So the only place is up in Rabbit Creek that doesn't. So, once again, you're talking about a value here that's gonna basically cover everything that we do and doesn't actually get you to the meat of what you're talking about.
Okay, so if she said vulnerable users, I guess, or should
Low
we
income and
say,
minority.
should we say low, well, I
It's
guess.
EJ populations, as far as I know, are low-income and minority populations. And when you actually look at the maps that the Muni has produced with low-income and minority populations,
Yeah.
that covers almost all of the municipality of Anchorage within the AMATS boundary.
I guess, and then my question is, so are we specifically wanting to look at people where we have, like you said, no access to vehicles, lower driving, more higher pedestrian? Do we have those quantified in some way?
Yes, so we do, in the non-motorized plan, we do have vehicle ownership as, we have that mapped. And we've got that also overlaid with, we will have that overlaid with the crash corridors, that Vision Zero put together. So, I mean, I think compared to what the data that Aaron was talking about, we are gonna have a much better idea of where those areas are. It's not gonna be environmental justice areas everywhere. It's gonna be, at least I'm hopeful, it's gonna be much more dialed down.
Okay, well, I would recommend striking at least a section that says has a history of systemic underinvestment, and how you decide to put the rest of that line. I just think we're gonna need to make sure that we have an identifiable area or specific location. If the recommendation is to add this, then we need to have an identified area. All right, I'm gonna move us along, then we have 15 minutes left, with 12 items to get through. Page 17. Okay, page 19.
Is there a definitions section of this policy document?
They're just the very first section is definition of complete streets.
Okay. So that's why they're putting the definition of traffic within that definition, because there's better places for definitions to live.
Yes.
Okay.
I think the concern was, and it was mentioned in another section, that when people hear traffic, they think cars and not all modes of transportation. So I think that's why that was recommended. All right, are there any other questions or comments on this? So right now, we've been looking at this for a while, and I'm confused as to what we are being asked to do for this one.
Recommending forward the State Streets policy to the AMATS policy committee for their review.
We haven't opened it for public comment yet,
You
so
were
I'm
asking
not
what we
gonna
were
accept
supposed to
that.
do
No, I
next, and that's what I was telling you.
I know.
Just got public comment.
No, what did it say? Pause, all
I was trying to answer
I
your
know.
question, Stephanie.
I know, I didn't know what we were doing, and so
I'll
now I
move
know.
it too, but we got public
I
comments
know.
still.
Are there any public comments at this time, in addition to the other public comments? John, you didn't comment in the public comment.
That's where we're at, right?
Okay.
Okay, well, just briefly, this is so much and it took so long to go through. If this goes to the policy committee, would we get like an amended version of the complete streets things, or will you take these comments and go?
What you'll get is the comment and response summary, and what we've typically done before is have a column out here that says TAC recommendation. So you have staff response, and then you have the TAC recommendation, and then that's what you'll see. And then once the policy committee decides what they want to do with all this, then we can edit this based on those changes.
I wondered to speed it up at that point, if you could reorder these. So there were a couple, like with the shall discussion, and then the one on sending all the exceptions to policy committee would be at the top. So we can discuss those right away. And then have your recommended changes, and then the ones with no change together. And then there's quite a few here that just say high school plus like acres, and put those at the end. But those, by the time we get to page 4, we can whip through it fast.
No, I agree.
Is that it? Maybe last?
Yeah, that, I think we've done something like that before with some of the stuff.
That'd be great.
You know, here's section 1, which is policy committee needs to decide on. Section number 2, TAC agreed, and section number 3 are just no changes needed. We do that. Sorry, Joni.
Any other public comments?
Now,
Okay.
I just, this is an astounding amount of work, Joni. This is really good stuff. Appreciate all your work on that.
You know, it was actually quite nice to see, there were a lot of comments that are just thank you for doing this, but there actually were some pretty substantive comments in here and some good recommendations and revisions, so it takes a lot to go through. I do appreciate all the work. All right, do we still have the motion before us? Now it's come back to us.
Yes. My motion to
So it was
move
moved
this to the
by,
policy committee for their review and approval.
and it was seconded by you, Mr. Winnemove? Are there any objections? All right, we are so moved. We have 12 minutes to finish everything else. Unless you those were the big ones, right? So we have before us now. Is it just me or did these get a little bit, the agenda's a little bit misnumbered, but that's okay. This is actually item 5D. It's a little misnumbered, but that's okay. This is 5D,
Sorry.
feedback resolution regarding autonomous vehicles.
This is exhibit A on why Jamie was really missed.
Yes.
Because this is Craig's version of it. I'll get better.
Do you want to say anything on this? All right, this is a letter that the VPAC put together of last month's meeting, and it was regards to autonomous vehicles. I am just a messenger, so I putting the letter through. There was some of the members were uncomfortable with autonomous vehicles. I guess are having issues with detecting vehicles in different types of weather conditions. I don't know all the details, but there's been some issues in snow or darkness or, I don't know, too much light or something like that. And so the gist was they were requesting, and Vivian has some pertinent information here, I think that she can share in a second. Requesting that the policy committee develop a number of policies to ensure that the autonomous vehicles can't be operated on Anchorage roadways until they have a multi-year record of safe operations in conditions similar to those that exist in Anchorage. So including snow on roads, whiteout conditions, obscured road lanes, darkness, icy roadways, and mountains. So, and then Vivian, you had some info I'd appreciate if you'd share too.
Thank you, through the chair. So currently, AMS does not have the authority to ensure that these vehicles may or may not operate on the roads. That's up to Title IX, the municipality, and the state, and the legislature does that. I can understand the spirit of this. I would say that might we need to reword this by saying encourage policies that prohibit people, but it's also hard to measure until they have a multi-year record of safe operations. That's relative. I mean, that's, so right now, I'm drafting a letter to Craig to go to the municipal attorney's office to send to the AG's office to get a determination of whether or not current law allows or does not allow autonomous vehicles on the road, seeing that it's silent. Some states, if it's silent, means they have an understanding that they are allowed. Other states, if the law is silent, it means they're not allowed unless they're expressly allowed on the road. So we need to get that straight first before we do anything else. So that's background to this. I understand the concern. There are like 10 different areas of problems with autonomous vehicles detecting pedestrians. It's not just detection.
Can I stop you right here?
Yes.
So there is a lot that goes into it. We just had the autonomous vehicle forum. I talked really highly about it. It was awesome. I guess my question here is there any action that the TAC needs to take with this? Because this is a resolution in the letter that BPAC has asked to be passed on to policy committee, so I don't see that we have any action that we need to take.
So the AMATS Policy Committee has made it very clear that any resolutions or letters, et cetera, that come from our advisory committees have to first go through the technical advisory committee. So I guess they're just asking you to look at this and recommend one way or the other for approval or disapproval. They will, the policy committee obviously will decide that, but they have made it clear everything has to come through the TAC. Nothing can go directly from one of the freight, or the bike and ped, et cetera, directly to the policy committee.
Okay. Because I feel this is very premature. There's nothing that I can say that we as a TAC or them as a policy committee can really do, and we can thank them for their concern and their interest, and it's definitely something that we're considering, and we're working with our state partners, the state municipalities to evaluate, what's going on with this, but I think this is very.
MATS has no authority to
Yeah,
do any
yeah.
of this,
No,
and I
no.
think it's an inappropriate recommendation to forward it to the policy committee.
Yeah.
This isn't what the Bike and Ped Committee is supposed to be providing recommendations about. And
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful if they focused on what they're supposed to be doing, not random other things that might strike their interest.
And I thought that forum that was brought forward there, Michigan actually is at the forefront of automated vehicle technology. And they do have similar conditions as Anchorage. And as a matter of fact, they're.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
I think they failed to have any fatalities.
They
I'm not-
have they're slowly rolling it out.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. It's a slow roll, but I mean, I think that's true. Most.
Yeah. So, okay. Any other questions or comments on this from the committee? Are there any questions or comments on this from the public? Mr.
John
Well?
Weddleton again. If you don't pass it on to the policy committee, that'd probably be great, but I read this and I go, this should just go to the assemblers. We would make a broader policy for the city than AMATS. Yeah. And I would think we wouldn't even want to see it, but
Yeah.
I kind of agree, it doesn't seem like this is.
That was my recommendation, that if anybody of the Bike Ped Advisory Committee has these concerns, and they should take it to either their local assembly members or their local legislators, so there can be evaluation of both state codes and municipal codes to see whether or not they're even allowed. We haven't even had that clarification yet. So that would be my recommendation. Is I can't make a motion, but
So moved.
yeah, that we do not forward this to policy committee and recommend that they reach out to their local bodies related.
As individuals, not as the BPAC.
Yes, as local individuals. They can identify that they're a part of the Bike Ped Advisory Committee, but I mean,
Not speak for
not
them.
speak
speak
for
for
that, unless, yes.
I'll second that.
Moved, so moved, Mr. Hanson.
Thank you,
second,
Ms.
Mr.
Bonillo.
Hanson. Are there any objections? All right, hearing none, we are so moved. All right, and item 5E is the, another BPAC letter. This is regarding DOT pre-construction manual. Now, I'm going to identify the fact that it's now 4:25 and we only technically have 5 more minutes left of this meeting, and I have the feeling this is going to be a very substantive conversation. So
time frame, but it's usually just for a short period of time, just to wrap up an item. And you know this better than I do, but
Yes.
it's probably an in-depth discussion. I don't think there's anything necessarily time sensitive about it, and I can't really.
Guess I will ask the committee with only, like I said, 4 minutes left on the agenda. And I think I read through this and I believe this is going to be kind of a big discussion point, at least for the state and myself when it comes to this. I would probably prefer that this be deferred to another meeting. Because it is August, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sunny out, that's all I know.
How is that meeting's agenda looking? Do we know?
It should be on it so far, I think.
We'll have another admin mod for you.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Your employees pay.
Bernard Corridor Plan, another admin mod, Bart.
Jamie and so.
Me.
Yeah.
That's
Are you
about it.
really gonna have an admin, Molly?
Yeah.
See?
So Mr. Living Room, you moved.
I move to postpone that specific thing to the August agenda.
Do we have a second?
Sure.
Okay. Are there any opposed?
Enthusiastic.
All right, this is going to be postponed to next month. Okay. Is there a quick update that we want to do for the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm Vivian Underwood for the record. So the last time we gave a presentation to you, we've been working on project details for the projects that were approved by the policy committee to be modeled. And I want to thank Ms. Mormillo for the hours that she spent with Mr. Gangadalen and myself, and the people at DOT and PI, with Scott Thomas and Edith McKee. So we have a nice package. We've sent it off to the modelers. They're going to model it for us. It's going to take about 8 weeks to get those results back. In the meantime, Aaron and I are going to be working on the financial analysis. We need to come before you to get your recommendation for the policy committee for the basic assumptions for the financial analysis. Similar to what we did for the interim 2035 MGB, you can remember back that is on revenues, costs, and the inflation factors, basically. And also the sources of revenue.
Are you going to do a work session on that?
We will, and we'll probably need more than one work session
Yeah.
as we go through. We're going to be making the sausage, as they say, for the heart of the MTP now. We're going to be coming together, modeling the alternatives and tweaking it with you and the policy committee, and tweaking the budget at the same time, the fiscal analysis. So then all that's going to go into Tech Memo 3, which will go to the public for their review. Then we'll bring it back to you all and the policy committee and get the blessing to get the preferred alternative to go into the internal draft, which we hope to have by the end of the year. There, I'm done.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It just hurt. There's a lot of new faces on this committee, and just, I keep bringing it up, but as we get more and more into the MTP, and once we start talking some of the fiscal constraints and some of the work sessions, you're gonna end up with not only these meetings, but several work sessions. And sometimes we have to hold special meetings because we have to get approvals in between to keep the MTP on date. So just so you know, the commitment on this committee is going to end up being more than just monthly. So heads up, everybody. Yes, Aaron.
Sorry, we just talked before this meeting, but we need a work session at probably the end of August or so to go ahead and start on the fiscal constraint. And it's recognized that that first of many work sessions will probably be an education lesson for everyone about the fiscal constraint portion of the MTP, what it is, how it's developed, and all that kind of stuff. We'll probably do a history lesson for the 2035, and then what we're doing for the 2040 will be a lot of stuff. So just kind of bring some snacks, and then we'll maybe provide some snacks or something, because it'll be a lot.
Yeah. And my only request of staff really is, as we start getting into these, the sooner we can get them scheduled and get those, get our little doodle polls out so we can put them on our calendar, the better. Because I'm clear right now for the end of August. I look good, but if we get to 2 weeks beforehand, it may not look as nice. So, All right, are there any other general information or committee comments other than happy birthday?
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Buck?
This is my final time sitting on the committee, and I want to thank you all for teaching me, and it's been a wonderful learning experience and privilege. I'm still with the EC, and we're under city now as well. The new person is out in the audience today. His name is Yemi. Yemi, think about.
Hi.
So he'll be joining you next. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. So Yummy, now that you've heard the announcements of what you're stepping into. I know, exactly. Well, welcome to the committee, and thank you very much. Please join me in an applause for Elise saying goodbye. We recognize this is a commitment for all of us, and we do appreciate your time and your effort and your positivity. You've had some very good comments and helped frame some things in ways I haven't looked at it, so I appreciate it. And welcome, we'll see you very soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Quick comment.
Yes.
So next month, the plan is that we will have these for you when you come to the meeting, and all the documents will be on here. So instead of a stack of paper, you will be able to look, you'll find the documents for the meeting here, you'll be able to get to the previous month's meetings as well. If you want paper copies, just let me know and we'll still have a paper copy at your seat. So, but otherwise, this will be the plan. This will not go home with you. This will stay here. We will take it back, but you will have a meeting.
There will be paper copies probably for
There
the
will be
public.
paper copies for the public,
Yeah.
and there will be paper copies for whoever would rather have paper in front of them as opposed to this.
Will we be able to take notes on those?
Sure. That is a great question, and I don't have an answer to you yet. But I'll find out.
Okay.
What the plan is to have the Google
Get one
Docs.
shot. Get one
Information on here, pull them in PDFs, so.
You might be able to mark them up, and the question is, if you actually physically take notes on them, you probably just have to like email them.
Email.
That's the idea.
So there'd be a way. All right, any other comments
That
for
is
the
cool.
order? Thank you very much for getting through this. We actually finished in 1 minute over 2 hours, and it's 1:33.
All right.